Shabbat Shalom, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Torah in 10, your weekly dose of Torah and context in 10 minutes or less. This week, we're going to be covering Devarim, Deuteronomy 1:1 to 3:22. I'm Hernan Cortez II. Let's get started. Portion recap. Devarim is about the beginning of the end. With this transition into the final book of the Torah, I wanted to shift the focus of the content from the general context of the events or the perspective of the wider ancient world, and instead draw more attention, or at least begin to the legal nature of this book and how it functions as a covenantal renewal and showcases the Torah as a constitution with theological applications rather than the other way around, as we normally portray it. A particular shift when beginning Deuteronomy is the change in perspective to the first person, with now Moses referring to himself with I and we, rather than the former style that we read in the previous books. This change helps to hammer home that this is the last act of Moses before this new generation crosses the Jordan into Canaan. He must now educate and lead them one last time before he passes away and they continue their journey under the new leadership of Joshua. It begins with a preamble of when this is taking place, the enemies that have been defeated, and a reminding of the people that God has indeed been faithful to the promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, with the mentioning of not only the land that has been presented before them, but also their number in verses 7 through 10. Turn and set your journey, and go to the hill country of the Amorites, and to all their neighbors in the Arabah, in the hill country, and in the lowland, and in the Negev, and by the seacoast, and the land of the Canaanites, and Lebanon, as far as the great river, the river Euphrates. See, I have placed the land before you. Go in and possess the land which the Lord swore to give your fathers to Abraham, to Isaac, and Jacob, to them and their descendants after them. I spoke to you at that time, saying, I am not able to bear the burden of you alone. The Lord your God has multiplied you. Behold, you are this day like the stars of heaven in number. This style of preamble was a well-known way of showing the power and honor of the sovereign to their vassals at the beginning of the covenantal agreement. With Moses now addressing the people and recounting the events of their sojourn up to this point, there's an interesting difference that we can already notice. Moses does not begin his recap of the experience with Egypt. Rather, he begins with the establishment of leaders and judges and how the law is to be meted out. From this, we get our only two commandments from within this portion in verse 17. You shall not show partiality in judgment. You shall hear the small and the great alike. You shall not fear man, for the judgment is God's. The case that is too hard for you, you shall bring to me, and I will hear it. With these two commandments, there is an immediate sense of how justice was to be given, without any partiality, and a sign of true equity by Hashem, and not allowing any man to cause fear in you while passing judgment, provides incorruptibility of the law. Both of these aspects are not only seen by us as holy and just, but would have been seen as righteous by any of the other nations according to their judicial structures. After these commandments are laid out, Moses continues his retelling of the journey from the incident of the 12 spies and the punishment that led the previous generation to die in the wilderness and this new group of Israelites to end up here, across from the promised land 40 years later. During the sojourn, we are reminded by Moses that Esau was given Mount Seir as a possession, and the sons of Lot are not to be provoked. These passages not only provide insight into which tribes own what parcels of land or mountains, but that Hashem is not fickle with his gifts to other tribes and tells the children of Israel not to attempt to take any of their land. If they were to try to, then this would dishonor the name and integrity of the king who provided those possessions to them to begin with. After passing through the valley of Arnon, the children of Israel were then faced with Sihon, king of Heshbon. We see again the same language used all the way back in Egypt with Pharaoh in chapter 2, verse 30. But Sihon, king of Heshbon, was not willing for us to pass through his land. The Lord your God hardened his spirit and made his heart obstinate, in order to deliver him into your hand as he is today. From this point on, we see another classical facet of ancient Near Eastern covenantal language, and that is the comparison of power between the greater sovereign and the lesser rulers through the listing of conquests and possessions taken. Finally, this particular portion concludes with the most recent events of the Gadites and Reubenites deciding to settle east of the Jordan and Gilead. The way that this is retold is yet again from the perspective of royal grants being given to these tribes. And there are clear conditions that need to be met as a reminder of the oath that these tribes took to receive this land grant, as stated in chapter 3, verses 18 through 20. Then I commanded you at that time, saying, The Lord your God has given you this land to possess it. All you valiant men shall cross over armed before your brothers, the sons of Israel. But your wives and your little ones and your livestock, I know that you have much livestock, shall remain in your cities which I have given you, until the Lord gives rest to your fellow countrymen as to you, and they also possess the land which the Lord your God will give them beyond the Jordan. Then you may return, every man to his possession, which I have given you. Within the events of Devarim, Moses initiates a covenantal renewal of the sovereign vassal treaty between Hashem and the children of Israel with the preamble of the journey of the second generation. The appointing of leaders and judges with specific mention to the commandments against showing partiality and not allowing intimidation to influence verdicts are presented. The events of the 12 spies is retold with detail regarding what tribes were encountered along the wilderness sojourn. The most recent conquests of King Sihon and Og are restated. The oath taken by the tribes of Gad, Reuben, and half of the tribe of Manasseh are spoken again to remind them of the conditions of their vow. Did you know? The basic structure of a suzerain vassal treaty is best placed within the years 1400 to 1200 BC. Many other ancient texts share slight similarities with the Book of Deuteronomy, some of which include the Code of Hammurabi, the Sumerian laws of Ur-Nammu, and the Old Babylonian laws of Eshnunna. Several locations such as Suf and Paran mentioned in this portion have not yet been fully rediscovered, and their exact locations are still unknown. Question time. Which covenants or oaths are mentioned in this week's portion? What covenant in particular is being renewed in Deuteronomy? How old is Moses by this point in the journey from Egypt? Happy studying, and Shabbat Shalom.